Hello and welcome everybody to episode 99 of the No Normal Show for Thursday, April 1st, brought to you by Revive Health. This is our weekly deep dive into how hospitals and health system marketers can navigate what we call the no normal. I am Josh Schoonover, Executive Vice President of Client Delivery here at Revive, and your guest host for today. And I'm joined by Chase Kleckner, Senior Marketing Manager at Revive Health, and our show's producer and backbone. Hi, Chase.
Hey, Josh, great to have you on the show.
Likewise. So Chase, episode 99, this I wanted 100. If I like the round number of 100, but maybe we have something else planned for next week.
We've got a special episode planned, though today's episode is going to be pretty special too. So excited about today's conversation.
Agreed. We're also joined by Paul Hackett, who is the Executive Creative Director at Revive Health and leads the creative department in turning strategies into compelling and emotional stories that connect brands with people. A little bit more on Paul. Before joining Revive, he spent 20 years in New York working on some of the world's most famous and premier brands, including MasterCard, Lowe's Home Improvement, BlackBerry, Smirnoff, Motorola, Forbes, De Beers, and bringing it back to what we all do, New York Presbyterian Hospital. And when he's not working, he spends time with his family and is exploring and learning all about the incredible culture of Nashville. And I'll just add, has kind of translating his copywriting craft into songwriting, at least your exploration of that. Hey, Paul.
Hey there. But I won't be singing or playing any of those songs today.
No, we can see about that. So just a few show notes before we dive in. On this podcast, we'll be sharing industry trends, research, stories from those within and outside of the industry, and other ideas and content to help health system marketers navigate the no normal successfully. If you want to understand a little bit more about what we mean of the no normal and some of the key principles, please check out our blog post, which Chase is putting in the chat function right now. And then also a few notes for our live listeners. Please use the question queue in Zoom to line up any questions that you may have, and we will try to get to as many of them as possible. You can also use the chat function to be able to interact with one another. But please, if you want us to see or address any of the questions, please use the chat queue. Remember, you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. We will be posting a recording of today's show by the end of the day. And you can also visit our website at thinkrevivehealth.com/no-normal for all things related to the podcast. And any of our COVID-19 resources can be found at thinkrevivehealth.com/COVID-19. All right, so let's get into the meat of it and start talking about brands. Chase, you ready?
Ready. Let's do it.
All right. More importantly, Paul, are you ready?
I am ready, I hope, but no, I am ready.
All right. So let's dig a little bit into Paul for a moment, if we could, just to kind of set the stage. So you've spent most, if not all of your time, certainly as a professional, but I know personally as well, thinking about brands, observing brands, kind of digesting what you see and what you think about that. What excites you about that?
Oh boy, geez. I think it started a long time ago. Let me do the math. I think I was 8, and I think the year was 1979. And I remember seeing that Mean Joe Green Coca-Cola commercial. I'm not sure who's on this call or how old everyone is, but hopefully some people will remember it. The Hey Kid Catch commercial. Although I probably didn't know it at the time, or I'm sure I didn't know it at the time, but I think, right then and there, I got hooked. I got hooked on the power of advertising and brands, and how they can reach iconic status and become part of our culture. Revered, looked up to, and trusted. So yeah, I think that was kind of what excited me in the beginning. And so nowadays, I think with each brand I touch, I think that Mean Joe Green commercial is in the back of my head somewhere, and I'm thinking to myself, how can I make this brand capture the hearts and minds of people? And I think that excites me every day.
So I have to ask, because you were talking to Chase and I a little bit about this, but it wasn't just that you liked the Mean
Yes,
Joe
you're
Green
right.
commercial.
I remember vividly, my friend Jeff and I, who's probably not on this call, we would, his sister was older, I think she was like 5 years older, and she would get the biggest kick out of Jeff and I reenacting the commercial. So we'd each take turns playing Mean Joe Green and the kid, and we'd get to chug like a juice or a water or something, or maybe even Coca-Cola back then. And then we'd have our shirt and we'd throw it at each other and catch, hey kid, catch. Thanks, Mean Joe. So yeah, that's what it was like being a child in the late 70s, no video games, reenacting commercials. But
Well, then it's fitting where you sit today.
yeah,
And
yes.
so like, just thinking about the things that you look for, what inspires or excites you, or the things that grab your attention as an executive creative director, what are some of those things that really either reach out to grab you or really like hold your attention that you observe?
Yeah. Well, lots of things grab my attention. And I think that's what makes a good creative person. You need to be constantly absorbing the world around you. Sometimes, taking those headphones off and not just sitting in your own world with your music and focus, but kind of just really absorbing everything around you, the big things and small things, human nature or whatever it is. And I think the great brands are good at this too, observing and staying relevant to the world as it changes, and constantly finding ways to fit in and stay top of mind for people. Because a lot has changed with how brands advertise and market themselves since I got in this business a little over 20 years ago, 24 years ago to be exact. It's kind of terrifying. And I think the big thing is that brands are no longer in these ivory towers, talking down to people. That's the way it used to be. Brands are like people now. And, they're your friend, and they need to talk to you on your level, the way a friend would. So I think, kind of getting back to your question, I think the thing that grabs me most are the brands that I call, and I've heard others say this too, other creative professionals or agency people, are the brands that are kind of act like human brands. They act like people in a way, people you like.
All right, so that idea of human brands, which is the thing we're going to be discussing today, tell me a little bit more around kind of like in your mind. You say you like to call it this, others do, but what stands out to you? Like what does it mean to be a human brand? What is it that are the attributes or the things that you identify as like elements of a human brand?
Yeah. I think there are lots of attributes of people and humans, but I kind of I think there are three that stand out to me. Like people, there are some people you want to be around all the time. You just love being in their company, and there are some you avoid at all costs, no matter what. And the ones you want to be around, I think they have three important traits. First, they're honest and authentic. That's one trait with two attributes. Second, they're good listeners. It's not just about themselves. They listen to you. It's conversations. It's a two-way street. And third, this might be interesting people. They're exciting and surprising. They're not boring. Do you like hanging around with boring people? Probably not. You kind of want people that kind of exciting and surprising people that are always kind of sharing these great stories or telling you something they did, and you kind of envy them a little bit.
Not coincidentally, but we at the very top of this, we talked about some of the industries and or the types of clients you've worked with in the past, but like hearing how you think about brands and what you find compelling, we shouldn't be too surprised that you find yourself really focused on healthcare and hospitals and health systems, because that seems to me, at least, that idea of a human brand is something, all of us on this call and all of the people that we work with and interact with, that seems like something that we could uniquely own in ways that other industries, other organizations outside of healthcare would have more difficulty. Like, this is the business we're in. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh yeah, I mean, without a doubt. I mean, the humanity that runs through healthcare is unbelievable. But back to that point, back in New York and working on different types of categories, whether it's packaged goods or alcohol or credit card or something, we are always searching for that human element, that human element of the brand, and how can we find that human element to connect with audiences. And back then in those categories, I mean, I think those categories and those brands, would kill for an ounce of the humanity that runs through healthcare every single day. I mean, it's saving lives, saving children's lives, immunotherapies and innovations that push humanity forward. It's huge stuff, and it's all rooted in humanity. Yeah, I think becoming a human brand as a healthcare brand is, I mean, it's the perfect match.
Yeah. So you mentioned, those three sets of attributes. I'd like to unpack them a little bit if we could. So the first one you talked about was being honest and authentic. Like, give us some thoughts on that.
I should have filled up my water more. You're making me do a lot of talking. Yeah, I think, as I said, like people, often, brand authenticity and transparency are more important than ever. I mean, as marketers, I'm sure most people know this. For starters, the curtain has been pulled back on advertising for quite some time now. People get it; they're kind of savvy to it in a way, and I think people are, I don't want to say more cynical. They call out false claims faster than before, and I think just that and they ignore certain types of old traditional types of advertising messages. So authenticity and transparency, it's kind of like this old thing we used to say to each other back in the day and back in ad school. It's like, I'm sure people have heard this, don't tell me how funny you are, tell me a joke. So for a brand, don't tell me how great you are, don't tell me how diverse your workforce is or something, or how sustainable your practices are. Prove it to me. Because these days, consumers support brands, with purpose, rooted in values and morals, and who don't waver from them, no matter which way the winds are blowing. I think people appreciate that, and they support it, and I think it's proven. And of course, honest and open communications are what people crave today from brands. I think, when it comes to authenticity, you be real and you be respectful. Nobody likes a faker. And on top of that, I think being an authentic brand today goes a long way to building brand loyalty over time. And you really need to prove that authenticity every step of the customer journey.
You mentioned that idea of cynicism, and I would just say, I don't think would be surprising to anyone on this call. Like, we're in a time where spin and skepticism in equal measure there's a surplus of all of that, right? And I think it's interesting, like, you think of one of the reasons for, people putting spin on things is to kind of cut through, to say something different, to put a different spin on something. But to your point about the honesty and authenticity, what's interesting now is I think we're in an environment where honest, transparent, clear communications is what can cut through all of that other stuff. And what's interesting is, like, there's a moment here. So, on this show and then elsewhere, we've talked quite a bit around the eyeballs and the trust in hospitals, health systems, and provider organizations, particularly in this time. And so one of the reasons is because there is a way, like, it's who people trust. There is a thing that they are coming to us for that they're not getting elsewhere, and in more with greater frequency for how that is. And I think health systems have done a really good job of meeting that moment and being an arbiter of truth and a guide and a source of confidence and comfort for consumers and patients in a time that's in short supply. And what I'm looking for, as we think of like what brands do in response to this, is like, okay, we have that attention and well-deserved. What do we do with that going forward? There's going to be a post-COVID time. There's going to be a post-vaccine frenzy. And so we have a broader conversation to have. And I still think those principles of honesty and transparency and authenticity, like, we have that. Let's use that.
Yeah, for sure. And don't get me wrong. And I think you know this too. That doesn't mean being honest and transparent and authentic doesn't mean you're not creative. Since I am the creative director, we're talking creative. It doesn't mean it's not creative. And I think there's very creative ways to have honest and transparent conversations as well.
Yeah. So we have a question, and that's relevant to this. And the question is, do you think having a clearly defined purpose can help brand authenticity?
I do. I think, yeah, I do feel that it would help with consistency as well. Yeah, I do.
I guess what I think about with that is, I think for sure, like brand, like people want to know, and more so now perhaps than ever, is that there is a purpose for the people and the brands that they interact with. There's just research to support that there is more of that it goes beyond, what a service or a good that might be provided, but that there is a greater connection when there's a shared sense of purpose. But that idea of like clearly spelling that out, what I think is important in that is we've probably all seen that how someone defines their purpose, how a brand defines their purpose, there's the idea of making it big and significant and meaningful and trying to include a bunch of things, and it's often in the speak of the organization rather than how someone wants to hear that, right? Like how the consumer may want to hear that. How can they relate to a purpose, outside the organization? So I think that idea of how do we clearly articulate a purpose is super important. But in addition to that and how do we articulate that in a way that is meaningful and resonant with people outside of our organizations?
For sure. And you got to make sure you're living up to that purpose, everywhere, all the time. We all know faster than ever brands are just called out on, not practicing what they preach. I want to say there was a story, and I don't know if I keep telling to look this up, but the whole idea of United Airlines Fly the Friendly Skies was this whole image play because they were perceived as not a friendly airline or something. So back in the day when it launched, all you needed to do was kind of run a TV commercial and say, hey, no, we're friendly. It's all good, because, people couldn't be tweeting and, sending videos of, something that happened on the plane to their social media accounts. So back then it was easier to just kind of talk the talk without walking the walk. I think now it's almost impossible to do that.
So getting into the next one, there's the honesty and authenticity, right? And then the next one you talked about was being a good listener. So we understand as people what it means to be a good listener. Talk to me about what it means for a brand to be a good listener.
Yeah, I think, ironically, this is a creative person talking about data, but I actually think data and knowing more about customers actually helps you tell a better story, story across touch points. Nobody likes someone that just talks about themselves, and not only it's arrogant, it's rude, and it's just annoying. I was talking to someone the other day, and it was our data person, and we were kind of trying to make an analogy. He was like, imagine going to a series of dinner parties or parties where you meet the same person 3 times. The first time, great conversation, you exchange pleasantries, you share a little bit about yourself. And then he was saying, well, now imagine the disappointment when you meet that person, 2 more times, and they remember nothing about you, your conversations. It was like, oh, nice to meet you again, or something. It's like starting all over again. So I think this is really important, because I think the same holds true for brands. And now more than ever, we have the data to listen and understand people, truly tap in to their hopes, and dreams, and tailor our messages to speak to them directly. I think, Delta Airlines does a great job of listening and learning about customers. And not only they know when, where, and how often you fly, they know where you sit. They know when you upgrade, and they leverage this. They leverage this data, call it that, to personalize your experience in flight. Hello, Mr. Schoonover. Would you like the usual? It seems kind of small and insignificant, but it's not. It's that whole experience of the brand, where I think data and knowing about folks can just amplify that core idea of what you want to stand for as the brand. So that's what I mean by.
Yeah, you talked about Delta. As I think about hospitals and health systems and provider organizations at large, like if we kind of zoom out a bit and look at what's underneath all of this, the existence or some of the core things we're doing as providers of services of care is that whole component of listening, right?
Yeah.
And understanding needs and wants, and then being able to do something through that listening to provide a way to advance or preserve or protect or improve, that person's health or life circumstances in a way. And so I think you get that in that one-to-one interaction, particularly if you're talking to your doctor or your care team or, any of the other services that go along that systems provide. But I think it's that what you're talking about is there's so many inputs, right? There's so many ways that consumers are communicating, whether that's how they respond to social, whether it's listening to what are the things that people are talking most about, whether it's really understanding where there's a lot of energy, good or bad, around a particular topic, and then being responsive to that, right? Not just a response to the thing you did, maybe there's content or maybe there's a campaign that you put out, but not just hearing how people think about that, but in the front of that, listening enough to understand how we should deliver that in the first place.
Yes.
How do we use the conversations that people are having to really find a way to enter into that conversation rather than interrupt it?
Mm-hmm. For sure.
It reminds me of, we have the opportunity to work with a lot of health systems, and for every campaign or every engagement idea that we put forth, there's about 20 or 30, that didn't get selected, or that for whatever reason or another, we didn't do. And it reminds me of this one that we had called the Future Self Project, which I think at its heart was a listening initiative and a responding to have this ongoing dialogue with consumers. Could you just give a little bit of a plug for what that Future Self Project was and why that's relevant here?
Yeah. Wow, you're going back into the archives on that one. Yeah, no, it was such a great idea. It was rooted in this kind of creative platform that we were proposing for one of our clients, called Long Live Humans. And it was a big kind of campaign idea, rooted in health and wellness, really that top of the funnel, getting people to be more aware of health and wellness and how we can help with that. And the Future Self Project was, you jump in when I'm talking about it, because I might remember certain parts. So we always want to try to, as I said, keep that consistency of voice and theme going through. So the Future Self Project was rooted in Long Live Humans. And the idea was to, write yourself, actually, no, it was going to be a video, send your 100-year-old self a note, a letter, a video letter on why you want to live to 100. What are the things that might hold you back? And what do you want to accomplish in those next 100 years? I think that was clear. So, it was rooted in social, and it was an exciting idea to kind of get people interested in, and then people could share their videos, their letters to their 100-year-old self. But going back to that idea of being a good listener, it was also a way for us to kind of gather that information and begin a conversation with folks. Like, for example, if someone, or Chase said, he's having trouble with weight or diabetes, or someone wants to quit smoking, or whatever it is, it was us to kind of then starting that relationship and providing content, or whether it's seminars or information on how we could help them reach their 100 years.
Yeah, one of the things I thought was interesting about that was, we thought through what are some questions that we could ask to kind of stimulate some thought.
Yeah.
And as you thought about, what your 100-year-old self might think, one of the things that we asked, which I think is relevant here, is what would you like to see cured or eradicated by the time you're 100? And what I found interesting about the idea was, so the idea is people would share that, right? And you'd look through that and you would comb through the responses, and you'd see a lot of the same things, right? Like cancer, or a certain type of cancer, or heart disease, or Alzheimer's. You'd get the things that many people are impacted by, and we would all love to have like remedies and cures for. And that gives you a sense of, what's important to large groups of people, and how do we then go about addressing that in a way that is, relevant to, the way that they think about it. But what I also thought was interesting about that is you would get some responses inevitably that would be like, I wish ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, would be eradicated, or cystic fibrosis. And so those are things that usually people have some level of experience with when they get to like a specific thing that's not like common for the masses, but like that also lets you know, like that's an invitation to a one-way conversation, right? To be able to really understand that more. And so it gives you clues into like ways to engage and connect with people beyond like those larger topics. So I just thought it was a good window into how people think, and in some ways an invitation to be able to provide value to them through conversations or information or resources.
Yeah, and it was a very interesting way to approach them and start that one-on-one conversation. You have to find something that's interesting that people will want to participate in as well.
All right. I want to unpack the third one. There is a question in the queue that we'll come to at the end. So whoever submitted that, we have not forgotten about that. But Paul, there was the third piece, which I think is really interesting. That's the idea of how can a brand be exciting and surprising? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that future self project. I think it fit into that group. Exciting and surprising. You hear so often, at least I hear a lot of times, creativity is the key to business now, to business success. I'm hearing it a lot. And in fact, top brand marketers, client side folks, now show up at major creative award shows like Cannes. I mean, that was unheard of years ago when I first started. It was always like, it's just where creatives go and hang out and pat each other on the back and celebrate. But now clients are showing up at these shows to learn more about creativity and see who's doing the best work and what's exciting, what's happening, what are the trends. And one reason, or the big reason, is because it's proven that creativity, creative brands, it can be an economic multiplier. How do we engage consumers and stay top of mind? Not just with the traditional ways in, but with exciting and surprising ways to deliver, not gratuitous, that exciting and surprising ways that really deliver onto our brand value in a really smart and relevant ways that connect with people. And it's proven this stuff, it works, it helps brands. People know advertising, they get it. So we need to constantly be on our toes and surprise them. meet them in unexpected places with unexpected messages. So that's really what I mean by, exciting and surprising.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that last part. I think there might be a natural inclination or reflex to say like exciting and surprising, and you can think about that with the boldness of some creative concept or the art direction or even some of the language that you use. But surprising can be a lot of things, right? Like it could be the channel selection that you use. It could be the types of events you participate in. It could be the types of partnerships you strike or influencers that you use. Like there's so many ways to think about like breaking a mold or to like really try to press, what might be typical or comfortable in a way that, looks to find other ways in, to your point. And so there's a whole gamut of ways that like surprising and excitement can manifest themselves that goes beyond some certainly bold creative helps, but it doesn't just have to be that, right? There's channel planning and audience insights and a true understanding, a deep dive into a particular thing. So that there's all kinds of room for that, regardless of where you sit in a market, regardless of what you've always done as an organization. And so it's at the fingertips of everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's a great point you make. And it's not, it's not meant to be, shock value or gratuitous or just kind of, it's really has to be rooted in the brand and brand value. So yes, it's not just, as you said, art direction or copywriting, but it's channel planning, it's media, and all those things you said. I don't want to repeat it, but yeah, good point.
So we talked about honesty and authenticity. We talked about being a good listener. We talked about excitement and surprise. And so as we kind of think of those things, one of the questions in the queue was going back to the first one, that honesty and authenticity. Have you ever seen a brand err too far on the side of honesty and transparency? And what implications might that have in a time where, cancel culture is something that is often, on the minds or discussed with folks?
Wow. Great question. Can we get back to them on that one? Think about that. No, it's a very relevant, extremely relevant question and really smart. I have to think a bit more. Nothing's coming right to top of mind. But it is something that is extremely relevant. So it has gone too far with honesty. I could probably look at the question myself.
Yeah, the question, have you ever seen a brand err too far on the side of honesty and transparency?
I guess I'd have to ask a question back is like, I guess in terms of, I guess I'd have to know what a little more context around what they were being honest or transparent about,
Well, I think, I guess the thing that sparks for me is maybe, right? So if we think about honesty and transparency, regardless of what the message is or what the perspective is, if it aligns with like the core brand value and the principles and the purpose, like what may be too far for some people who are used to, a different interaction might feel far off, but might be really embedded in the core of who that organization is and what they want to communicate. And that's not unintentional. Where I think I have seen examples of brands maybe erring on the side is when it's not rooted in that, or you have someone who is serving in some role as an occupant of a spokesperson role or has an influential leader who either uses those brand channels or their own to express a point of view that is very contrarian or that is very surprising to people, or that may, create a lot of energy and anxiety around, and that naturally has an impact on the brand, right? That seems more of more one-off things than intentional honesty and transparency efforts aligned with the purpose and values of the organization.
Yeah, I'd agree.
One person said Pepsi might be an example of a brand that has gone too far on honesty and transparency.
Are we, yeah. I mean, are we referring to the Kendall Jenner commercial?
Could be.
Yeah.
To me, if that is the example, I saw that as more of, posing as honest than it being authentic. At least that's how it was received. That it seems non-authentic and disingenuous.
I agree. I think it was.
All right. Thanks for the conversation, Paul. Thank you, everyone, for the questions we received. That's it for today's show. As always, thank you, Chase, for making this all happen.
Yeah.
Please let us know if there's something you'd like us to cover in future episodes in the Zoom chat, or shooting us an email at nonormal@thinkrevivehealth.com. And please remember to visit thinkrevivehealth.com/COVID-19 for a recording of today's episode and all of our content related to this crisis, and to subscribe on iTunes. And please, join us next week for our 100th episode, where it'll be a kind of no filter, no holds barred cacophony of perspectives and opinions between Chris Bevelo, who many of you know because you tune in, and our CEO, Brandon Edwards. So it should be a great discussion. Plus, it's the 100th episode. We have to memorialize that. All right. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.